Montana Territory, May 1882. The wind carried dust and silence across the open plain as the wagon creaked to a stop just beyond the split-rail fence. The widow stepped down first. Her dress was worn at the hem, her boots caked with weeks of hard trail dirt, but her back stayed straight. Her name was Delaney Douglas, and she had not cried since the night her husband died under a falling pine in Colorado. She had 4 children behind her, their faces thin, their eyes too quiet for their years. They did not complain. They just watched her, trusted her, followed her down the road until she said, "We stop here." The land was dry but held promise. A single clapboard house stood in the distance, square and sturdy, with smoke curling from the chimney. The barn behind it leaned a little to the west, but the fences were mended, water trough full. A man in a wide-brimmed hat stood near the porch, a rifle resting easy in his arms. He did not raise it. Delaney squared her shoulders and walked forward, the children trailing behind her like ducklings in coats too small. The man stepped off the porch and met her halfway. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, and his skin was tanned deep from sun and labor. His name was Gideon North, and he said nothing for a long moment, just looked at her, then at the children. One of them, a boy with a stubborn chin, clutched a ragged doll too tightly. Finally, Gideon said, "You lost." "No," Delaney said. "We are looking for work, food, a roof." His gaze dropped to the smallest child, a girl with hair the color of wheat and no shoes on her feet. Gideon gave a small nod. "How many?" "5 of us," she said. 4 children. I can work. I will work." He looked at her again, longer this time, then turned toward the house. "Well," he said, "I set 5 plates at the table." Delaney blinked. "Why 5?" He looked back over his shoulder, voice quiet. "I figured you would be coming." It knocked the breath from her. She did not know why. She had never met this man, had never even seen this stretch of land until that morning. But something in the way he said it, simple, steady, made her throat tighten. He led them inside. The children sat at the table without needing to be told. They did not wolf the cornbread and beans, though their eyes were hungry. Delaney remained standing, hands folded, until Gideon pulled out the chair beside his and said, "Please." She sat. She ate. She did not cry. After the meal, Gideon brought out a jar of water and passed it around. The children's names came out between sips. "Gareth's the oldest," she said, nodding to the boy of about 11. "Then Daisy, she's 9. Georgia is 6. Grady's 4. "They your only kin?" Gideon asked, voice low. "All I have left," he nodded. "You can stay in the bunkhouse. Got a stove in there. I will see to firewood." She looked him in the eye. "We do not take charity." He met her gaze. "I do not give it." That night, she laid all 4 children on a straw mattress inside the bunkhouse and tucked her old shawl around their feet. The stove popped and spit, and she watched the flames until they blurred. Outside, the wind shifted. She stepped out into the dark. He was there, leaning against the porch post, a pipe in his hand but unlit. "You knew we were coming?" she asked. He gave a slow shrug. "Neighbor from downriver came through a week ago. Said a woman with 4 little ones passed through his way. Said she was walking the land like she meant to own it. I figured if you made it this far, you might need a place to rest." Delaney looked up at the stars. "I meant to stop in Helena. But the road turned and I followed." Sometimes the road knows better. She looked at him, really looked. His face was lined but not hard. He looked like a man who had worked until his hands forgot softness, but his voice had a quiet to it. Like he knew how to hold silence without being afraid of it. "My husband died last fall," she said. "Tree broke free in a storm. He never even saw it coming." Gideon looked down, thumb brushing the edge of his pipe. "I lost my brother to the war, never got to say goodbye." They stood quiet then. The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. You will want help with the harvest, she said. I can tend beans, mend fences. Gareth can pull his weight. I figured, he said. She turned to go, but he called her name, Delaney. She stopped. You did good. Getting them here. She looked back. Her lip trembled just once, then steadied. Thank you. In the weeks that followed, the land warmed. Delaney rose before dawn, hauling water, chopping roots, showing the children how to carry wood properly. Gideon never treated her like glass. He let her fix the pigpen latch, showed her how to oil the plow yoke. They worked side by side, sweat on brows, dirt under nails. At night, she brought bread to the house when she baked it. He brought stew to the bunkhouse when he had too much. The children grew rounder in the cheeks. Gareth followed Gideon around the farm, learning how to drive nails straight. Grady laughed for the first time in months when Gideon lifted him onto the mare's back and let him hold the reins. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, Gideon found her at the woodpile. You split that yourself, he asked, nodding at the stack. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand. I do not care for idle hands. He took the axe from her gently. Let me finish. She did not argue. She stepped aside, watching as he brought the axe down with clean, strong swings. You have no wife, she asked, the question out before she could stop it. No, he said. Had no time, and then it just stayed that way, she nodded. I understand. The silence stretched. He paused, axe halfway to the ground. Until now. She looked at him, startled. But he was not watching her. He was staring at the wood, his jaw tight. Delaney swallowed. Her heart thudded in her chest like a galloping horse. She turned and walked back to the bunkhouse, her fingers trembling. But that night, when she laid down, she smiled into the dark. The road had turned. And she was not sorry. By late June, the cottonwoods behind the barn had leafed out heavy and green, their branches swaying slow in the warm wind. The creek just beyond them had dropped some, but it still ran clear over stone, enough to keep the troughs full and the beans thriving in their rows. Delaney stood barefoot in the shallow edge one morning, skirts pulled above her knees, scrubbing a shirt against a flat stone. Her fingers were red from the water. The sun had only just cleared the ridge. Gideon came down the slope with a small pail swinging from one hand and a fishing pole in the other. Creek's quiet today, he said, crouching to rinse his hands. I like it that way, she said. It listens better than most folks. He chuckled low. You always talk to water. Only when I need someone to answer. She wrung the shirt and laid it on a branch. He watched her a moment, then set the pail down and pulled something from his back pocket. Found this in the loft, he said, holding out a faded cloth book. Someone stitched it up years back. Poems, looks like. Thought maybe Daisy would take to it. She took the book, fingers brushing his. The spine was soft with use, the stitching uneven. She's been asking about letters, Delaney said. I'll teach her with this. Gareth's taken to hammering, Gideon said, glancing back toward the house. He's got an eye for straight lines, could do more than farm if he's taught right. His father never let him help much, she said. Said boys should stay boys as long as they can. Gideon bent to pick up a flat stone, tossing it across the creek. It skipped twice before sinking. Maybe, he said, but a boy who knows how to build something can hold his head higher. Delaney didn't answer. She stood watching the ripples fade. That evening, Georgia carried a bundle of wildflowers to the table, dropping them into a chipped tin cup. Grady toddled after her, clutching a wooden spoon Gideon had carved from a scrap of pine. The boy hadn't let it out of his hand in days. After supper, Gideon sat on the porch rail while Gareth practiced driving nails into a spare board. Delaney settled on the step below him, her hair still damp from the creek. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You ever think about teaching? She looked up. I taught my sisters to read before I married. There was no schoolhouse in our valley, just a minister who let us take his books. Seems a waste, he said. You know things most folks don't. I know how to keep food from spoiling and how to mend a saddle with thread meant for coats. He smiled, the lines at his eyes deepening. That counts. She watched her son square the nail, jaw tight with focus. There's still part of me that waits for the next bad thing, she said, voice quiet, even now. I know that feeling, she turned to him. Do you? He didn't look away. I wake up some nights still expecting the barn to be empty, the door swinging in the wind. He paused. After my brother passed, I kept hearing his voice around corners. Took near a year before I stopped answering it. She looked down at her hands. Sometimes I forget what James sounded like, only remember the way the ground shook when the tree fell. He didn't speak. He didn't reach for her, either. Just sat with it. The next morning, before the sun rose, Delaney lit the stove and kneaded dough with slow, steady hands. She hummed something her mother used to sing while peeling apples. Georgia stirred beside her, eyes still heavy with sleep. When the bread was cooling and the children fed, she stepped outside and found Gideon hitching the wagon. I'm taking a load into town, he said. Could use company. She nodded once. Let me fetch my shawl. They rode side by side, the wagon creaking over hard, packed dirt, morning light catching on the brass of the harness buckles. He handed her the reins halfway there. You trust me with this. Horse walks straighter than most men. She smiled without meaning to. They reached town by mid-morning, dust rising around the wheels. Gideon offloaded sacks of potatoes and a bushel of green beans at the mercantile. Delaney stayed quiet, eyes moving over the dry goods and the women standing in clusters near the porch. Their bonnets were prettier than hers, their boots polished. Inside, Gideon bartered for lamp oil and flour, then turned to her. Need anything? She touched the edge of a bolt of fabric. No, but the shopkeep, a man with a long beard and a missing tooth, gave Gideon a look. You finally brought someone with sense. Delaney stepped back, unsure, but Gideon only said, She's the reason the beans came in fat. When they left, he handed her a small wrapped parcel. What's this? Ribbon, he said, eyes on the road ahead. For George's braid. She held it in her lap the whole ride home. That night, after the children were in bed, she walked to the porch where he sat with his boots off, nursing a chipped cup of coffee. I saw the way those women looked at me in town, she said. Didn't matter to me, he said. She stood quiet for a long moment, then took the seat beside him. The lantern inside flickered against the window. You ever think of leaving? She asked. I did, he said. Once. What stopped you? He looked at her, voice low. Didn't want to miss what might come next. They sat in the hush between words, the night warm around them, and when she rested her hand on the porch rail, he placed his over it, just enough to be sure. She didn't pull away. The first thunderstorm rolled in just after dusk, the kind that came down from the northern hills with no warning. Delaney was inside the bunkhouse, hanging the children's damp garments near the stove, when the first flash lit the windows. Georgia whimpered in her sleep. Delaney bent close, whispering something soft at her ear until the child settled again. By the time she stepped outside, the wind had picked up. Gideon was already walking toward her, sleeves rolled down, lantern swinging low in his hand. You've got leaks, he said. One above the stovepipe, another near the back wall. Come sleep in the house tonight. Delaney hesitated, eyes lifting toward the dark sky. We'll be fine. The back corner's soaked through. It'll drip on the bedding before long. She looked past him toward the house. Warm light glowed behind the windows. She thought of Gareth, how he'd started coughing in the mornings. She nodded. Gideon didn't say anything else, just led her and the children inside. He had already laid out quilts in the parlor, moved the rocker aside. Grady curled into the pile with his thumb in his mouth before anyone had spoken a word. Delaney stood behind the children, hands folded, unsure. "You can take the bedroom," Gideon said. "I'll stay out here." "That's your bed." He looked at her, then at the children. "It's theirs tonight." She watched him a moment longer, then turned and guided the children through the narrow door. The room smelled of cedar and old paper. The quilts were clean. She settled the girls on the far side, Gareth at the foot. She lay down last, listening to the rain patter across the roof and the wind tug at the eaves. In the morning, the storm had passed. Mist clung to the fields and the ground soaked up moisture like a dry sponge. Gideon had coffee on the stove before Delaney stepped into the kitchen. "You didn't sleep," she said. There was no need. She poured a bit of the coffee into a tin cup, tasted it. Too strong. He leaned back against the counter. "You can do better." "I can." He handed her the kettle, and she set about boiling new water, measuring just enough ground bean into the pot. She moved like she belonged there, bare feet against the plank floor, hair pulled back with a bit of string. Gideon watched her quietly until her back was turned. "Georgia told me you used to play the fiddle," he said. Delaney's hand stilled on the tin pot. "James taught me. I haven't touched one since he passed. Still in your bones, though. I'm not sure I'd remember how." He reached for a jar of preserves and set it on the table. "You'd find your way back. Like anything worth keeping." Later that day, while the children helped turn the soil along the south fence line, Delaney swept the porch clean, her skirts catching the breeze. She found herself humming without realizing it, something slow and tuneless. Gideon leaned against the post nearby, whittling a sliver of oak into something with a rounded edge. "You hum when you're thinking," he said. "Do I?" "You do." She paused, brushing a hand over the rail. "I've been thinking about the schoolhouse." He looked up. "There isn't one." "There could be. There's a room back of the church in town. I saw benches stacked along the wall. You want to teach again." She glanced toward the barn where Gareth was helping Daisy lift a water bucket. "They need more than chores and soil. They need stories. Numbers. A future." He nodded slow. "You'd be good at it." "I'd need to ask the Reverend. I know him. I'll take you Sunday." She didn't answer right away. Then, "I'd like that." That night she sat with him beneath the porch awning, the stars hidden behind haze. The children had fallen asleep curled on quilts, the bunkhouse still drying out. Delaney's fingers toyed with the frayed hem of her sleeve. "You never said why you stayed," she said. "After your brother died." He didn't look at her. "Someone had to bury him. And I didn't see the point in running from land that knew me. You built all this alone, piece by piece, with calloused hands and a temper I had to learn to keep down." She turned toward him, voice quiet. "You've been kind to us. You make it easy." She looked down at her lap. "I don't know what's next. I only planned as far as survival." "Then plan farther," he said. "You've got room now." She blinked once, then reached for the empty mug between them and turned it in her hands. "I don't want to be a burden. You aren't. I don't want pity. No one's offering it." She set the mug down and stood. Her hand brushed his shoulder as she passed. He caught her wrist gently. "You're not alone anymore, Delaney." She stood still, the weight of that truth sinking into her like rain into dry ground. Then she nodded once and walked inside. Gideon sat back, listening to the house settle. Something had shifted. He didn't name it. He didn't need to. By the first days of July, the fields were thriving in the long heat, and the children's skin had browned under the sun. The bunkhouse roof had been patched, though none of them returned to it. Delaney and the children had settled into the spare room inside the house without being told to. No one remarked on it. The rhythm between them had simply shifted quietly, completely. On a Tuesday morning, Gideon came in from the pasture with his hat in hand and dust along the seams of his trousers. He looked toward the table, where Delaney was kneading dough, her forearms dusted in flour. "I need to ride south tomorrow," he said. "The cattleman near Dry Creek selling off 2 yearlings. I aim to look them over." She pushed her weight into the dough, fingers working the edge. "That far a ride, half a day down. I'll sleep on my saddle if I have to." She didn't lift her head. "You do better with someone at your back. Those hills aren't always friendly." He rested the hat on a peg by the door. "I know them, still." He stepped closer, voice softer. "You offering?" She glanced up, eyes unreadable. "I'm saying Gareth can look after the others for a day. If you want company." He studied her a moment. "I'd like that." They left before first light the next morning, the horses cutting sharp silhouettes against the rising sun. Delaney rode with her skirts hitched over her boots, steady in the saddle, her back straight. She didn't speak much along the way, just watched the land pass, eyes alert. Midday brought still heat, and a swarm of gnats near a muddy creek. They stopped near a stand of cottonwoods to let the horses drink. Gideon passed her a piece of dried venison wrapped in cloth. "You ever miss Colorado?" he asked, sitting on a fallen log. She peeled back the cloth, thoughtful. "No, I miss who I was in it, but not the place." He nodded, chewing slow. "You changed." "I had to," she said. "When James died, everything I'd leaned on cracked. I had to learn how to stand without it." He looked toward the water. "I know something about that." She didn't press him. Instead, she leaned back against the tree trunk and closed her eyes. "We've come farther than I thought we would." "You mean the land?" "I mean everything." They reached the cattleman's spread by late afternoon. The man was older, with a split lip and a bad leg. He offered cool water and a place to sit, then led them into the corral. The 2 yearlings were lean but strong-limbed with good eyes. Gideon examined their hooves, ran his hand along their flanks. "They'll fill out," Delaney said quietly. He looked over, surprised. "That's what I was thinking." The cattleman named his price. Gideon didn't haggle. "I'll be back with the wagon come Monday," he said. "Keep them penned." They rode until the sun dipped low, the air turning cooler. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled above the ridge. Delaney guided her mare beside Gideon's gelding, her voice low. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Sometimes, not often." "I do," she said. "More now than I used to." He glanced at her, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. "What do you see?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her saddlebag and pulled out the cloth-covered book of poems he'd given her weeks ago. "Daisy's learned 10 new words. She reads to Georgia at night." "That's a start," he said. She passed him the book. "She wrote something on the back page for you." He opened it. Inside, in careful, crooked letters, were the words, "Thank you for letting us be safe." Gideon closed the book slowly. "It's not a debt." "I know it's not," Delaney said, "but I want you to understand, you gave us more than shelter." He looked at her, the horse shifting beneath him. "You gave me back something too. I just didn't know I'd been missing it." They reached the farm just as twilight softened the sky. The children came running out to greet them, barefoot and flushed from play. Gareth nodded at Gideon, already reaching for the reins. Inside, the house smelled of sweet corn and smoke. Delaney moved without hesitation, gathering dishes, settling the children. Later, after the house had gone quiet and the lanterns were out, she stepped out onto the porch where he stood, arms crossed. "I don't want to leave," she said. He turned toward her. "You don't have to, I mean it. So do I." She moved beside him, the hem of her dress brushing his boot. "You built this place with your own hands. It's good land, but it's better with more voices in it." "I know." She looked up at him, her voice steady. "I'm not asking for a promise tonight. You don't have to." They stood in the hush of it, the air warm, the stars clear above the ridge. Then, quietly, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. The morning sun came in low and golden through the kitchen window. lighting the dust that hung in the air like lace. Delaney was standing near the stove, wrapping a cloth around a jar of blackberry preserves. Georgia sat at the table, sewing a button onto Grady's shirt with slow, careful stitches. Outside, the wind carried the scent of dry hay and something faintly sweet wild sage crushed under hooves. Gideon leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching them. He didn't speak until Delaney turned. "I heard back from the Reverend," he said. "He's agreed to open the back room of the church for teaching. Said there's books stored in the loft, too." Delaney set the jar down, brows lifting. "He say when? Wants you to start after the harvest fair. Said the town's ready for a school again." Georgia looked up from her stitching. "Mama, can I come too?" Delaney knelt beside her, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek. "You'll come every day. So will your brothers and sister." Gideon stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I'll take the wagon into town tomorrow. We'll pick up the benches, maybe a blackboard if there's one to be had." Delaney stood, brushing her hands on her apron. "You've done more than I asked." "I wanted to," he said, "and not just for the children." She met his eyes. "I know." That evening, while the children played near the barn, Delaney walked the fence line along the north pasture. The sun was dropping low, casting long shadows through the grass. She stopped where the posts bent slightly inward, hands resting on the top rail. Gideon came up beside her, quiet as always. He didn't speak until she did. "I've been thinking about building more garden beds," she said. "If I'm to keep feeding 7 of us, I'll need more squash and potatoes come fall." He nodded. "I can dig the ground this week. We'll need more jars for canning. I'll ask the widow Marks. She's got shelves full she doesn't use anymore." She turned to him. "You've made room for us in everything." "I didn't have to," he said. "I wanted to." Delaney hesitated, then stepped closer. "And if I said I wanted to stay, not just for the schoolhouse, not just for the children, I'd say I hoped you already had." The wind moved gently between them, warm against their faces. She reached for his hand, fingers steady, her eyes never leaving his. "I don't want to be a guest in this house anymore," she said. "I want to belong to it, to you." He drew her hand up, pressed a kiss into her wrist where the pulse beat. "You already do." They stood there until the last light drained from the sky, the hush between them filled with something quiet and whole. 2 weeks later, under a sky pale with early September stretch, Delaney stood beside Gideon at the edge of the town square. The harvest fair bustled behind them, children running with sticks of molasses candy, the smell of roasted apples drifting from the cook fire. Her dress was new, stitched from calico she'd traded for with preserves. His shirt bore a fresh seam, patched by Daisy's steady hand. They walked together past the church, where the back room had been swept clean and the benches arranged in neat rows. A slate hung on the wall and a shelf of readers stood waiting. Gideon paused at the door, running a thumb across the frame. "You nervous?" She shook her head. "No. Not anymore." He looked down at her, his voice low. "I spoke to the judge in Helena. Took me some time, but I filed the papers." She blinked. "What papers?" "The kind that make a woman and man something more than neighbors." Delaney's breath caught. "You mean?" He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded page. Inside, the ink had dried smooth, a marriage license, her name and his set down in careful script. "I didn't want to press," he said, "but I want you beside me, not just for a season." She looked at the paper, then at him. "Then let's stop waiting." They were married a week later beneath the cottonwoods by the creek, with Gareth standing tall beside Gideon and Daisy holding George's hand. Grady dropped petals from a basket he'd insisted on carrying himself. The whole town came, bringing pies and bread and a carved cedar trunk for the new family. Afterward, Gideon and Delaney stood at the edge of the pasture, watching the children race the wind through tall grass. "I never thought peace could come this way," she said. "Not after everything. It doesn't come easy," he said, "but it stays longer when it's earned." She leaned into him, her head against his shoulder. "We earned this." He wrapped his arm around her waist. "We did." In the months that followed, the children thrived. Gareth took up building with Gideon, learning to square joints and plane boards smooth. Daisy read aloud to her siblings every night by lamplight. Georgia brought home wildflowers for the schoolroom desk, and Grady learned to count by feeding the hens. Delaney taught 6 children from town alongside her own, chalking lessons onto the slate with sure hands. And every night when the work was put away and the wind had settled, she and Gideon sat on the porch with her hand in his, the silence between them no longer heavy, only full. They grew old in that house, under those skies, with the sound of laughter in the fields and the steady rhythm of a life well built. And they never once looked back.